For over a century, rivals, regulators, Silicon Valley insurgents, and the relentless march of technological progress all committed the exact same fatal error when confronting Eastman Kodak. They assumed the Colossus of Rochester was merely a film company, a chemical manufacturer masquerading as a technology titan, a relic shackled to silver halide crystals and darkroom chemistry. They were catastrophically wrong. Consider the sheer, unrelenting cascade of annihilation this corporation absorbed. Fujifilm, the surgical Japanese predator, invaded their home market with ruthless precision, hijacking the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, while Kodak's executives haggled over sponsorship fees. Silicon Valley spawned an entire generation of digital insurgents who commoditized the camera into a disposable feature inside a telephone. Apple, Samsung, and Google obliterated the standalone camera market entirely. Wall Street eviscerated Kodak's stock from a peak of roughly $31 billion in market capitalization to a grotesque, sub-$100 million carcass. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, American capitalism's most exclusive cathedral, expelled them after 74 consecutive years of membership. And in the cruelest twist of all, the very technology that dismantled their empire, pixel by merciless pixel, was born inside their own laboratories, invented by their own engineer, funded with their own money, and buried alive by their own terrified executives. Any other industrial titan would have been liquidated at auction, its assets parceled off to vulture funds, its name stamped onto disposable electronics manufactured in Shenzhen. Any other corporation that squandered a 130-year head start, a 90% market stranglehold, and over 7,000 proprietary digital imaging patents would have been incinerated from the ledger of corporate history. A cautionary footnote, nothing more. But instead of dissolving into the ash heap of industrial irrelevance, Kodak did something that defied every obituary ever printed about it. It filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, shed its own skin like a wounded reptile abandoning a dying exoskeleton, sold the very patents it had spent decades hoarding, and emerged, diminished, disfigured, barely recognizable, as something its founder would never have comprehended. Not a film company, not a camera company, a chemical manufacturer, a commercial printing operation, and a pharmaceutical aspirant courting the United States government for hundreds of millions of dollars during a global pandemic. This is the story of how Eastman Kodak invented the future of photography, entombed it in a corporate vault for 3 decades, watched in paralyzed agony as that future devoured its empire from the inside out, and then clawed back from clinical death by becoming something entirely alien to the brand that once defined how humanity preserved its memories. To comprehend the full magnitude of this implosion, we must rewind the clock to 1880, to a cramped boarding house kitchen in Rochester, New York, where a 26-year-old former bank clerk named George Eastman was boiling animal gelatin and spreading photographic emulsions onto glass plates with his bare, chemical-scarred hands. The sanitized mythology would have you believe Eastman was a genteel visionary who democratized photography out of pure, selfless passion. This is a profound historical distortion. Eastman was, from his first experiment, a ruthlessly calculating predator who understood one principle with almost terrifying clarity. The money was never in the camera. The money was in what the camera consumed. In 1884, he patented the first practical roll film, liberating photography from glass plates that had imprisoned the medium inside professional studios. In 1888, he introduced the original Kodak camera and unleashed the most devastatingly effective slogan in the history of consumer technology. "You press the button, we do the rest." That sentence was not an invitation. It was a declaration of commercial architecture. The customer pressed the button. Eastman controlled everything else: film, processing, printing, chemicals, paper. Every photograph generated recurring revenue flowing back to Rochester. It was the razor and blade model perfected half a century before Gillette. And in 1900, Eastman delivered the killing blow to exclusivity. The Brownie camera, sold for $1. Photography ceased to be the preserve of the wealthy. It became a universal human compulsion, and Kodak owned the entire supply chain of that compulsion, with profit margins on film exceeding 60%. But Kodak's ultimate weapon was something entirely invisible, something no balance sheet could quantify, and no competitor could reverse engineer: emotional monopoly. They did not merely sell film, they sold the physical, tangible substance of human memory itself. A Kodak photograph was not a product. It was a birth certificate, a wedding album, a child's first steps, a grandparent's final portrait. The phrase Kodak moment entered the English language not as marketing, but as cultural vocabulary, a universal shorthand for irreplaceable instants that demanded permanent preservation. Abandoning Kodak felt not like switching brands, but like betraying your own family history. It was psychological lock-in of the most intimate, devastating kind. For over a century, Kodak was not competing in a market. It was administering a religion. By the mid-1990s, the empire had reached its absolute zenith. Revenue peaked at approximately $16 billion in 1996. The company employed over 145,000 people, most concentrated in Rochester, where Kodak was the gravitational center around which an entire city orbited. Hospitals, schools, neighborhoods, and tax revenues all dependent on the yellow box titan. Kodak commanded roughly 90% of film sales and 85% of camera sales in the United States. The brand ranked among the 5 most valuable on Earth. Profit margins on film remained obscenely high, north of 60% on consumer rolls, even steeper on professional and motion picture stock that fed Hollywood. Every major film, every newspaper photograph, every passport, Kodak chemistry touched them all. The corporation seemed ontologically permanent, as embedded in American life as electricity or running water. But the higher the ascent, the more annihilating the plunge. And buried beneath that mountain of profit, in a basement laboratory, a quiet existential horror had been gestating since 1975. In December of that year, a 24-year-old Kodak electrical engineer named Stephen Sasson assembled a device that would, over the next 3 decades, systematically dismantle the company that employed him. It weighed 8 pounds, captured a single black and white image at 0.01 megapixels, and recorded it onto a cassette tape in 23 seconds. When Sasson demonstrated his creation to senior management, the response was a sentence that would echo through corporate history as one of the most catastrophic misjudgments ever uttered. "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." They buried it, not because they didn't understand. An internal study in 1981 predicted with chilling accuracy that digital would replace film by approximately 2010. They possessed the invention. They possessed the timeline. They chose to protect the profit. Film generated 60% margins. Digital cameras required no consumables, no processing, no chemical replenishment, margins approaching zero. To embrace digital was to extinguish the most lucrative recurring revenue stream in consumer products history. And so commenced the longest, most agonizing act of self-destruction in American commerce. In 1984, Fujifilm humiliated them at the Los Angeles Olympics after Kodak balked at the sponsorship fee. In 1988, Kodak acquired Sterling Drug for $5.1 billion, a pharmaceutical company with zero connection to imaging, and hemorrhaged money for 6 years before selling at a staggering loss. Throughout the 90s, they poured billions into digital research while sabotaging their own products, terrified a successful digital camera would cannibalize film. They built cameras and priced them too high. They developed online photo platforms and starved them of resources. They accumulated over 7,000 patents and weaponized them not for innovation, but for licensing extraction. In 2003, they announced a pivot to digital, 8 years too late. By 2005, Kodak was the #1 digital camera seller in America and losing money on every unit. In 2004, the Dow removed them after 74 years. The iPhone arrived in 2007, the final executioner. Film revenue collapsed. Digital revenue never reached survivable margins. Workforce reductions carved through Rochester like industrial amputations. 145,000 employees reduced to fewer than 20,000. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Market capitalization that had once surpassed $31 billion had disintegrated to under $150 million. The company that invented digital photography had been executed by digital photography. It seemed like the definitive end. Yet, here lies the grand corporate plot twist. The grotesque epilogue no obituary writer anticipated. In bankruptcy's wreckage, Kodak sold the weapon that had killed it. In 2013, a consortium of technology superpowers, Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Samsung, paid approximately $525 million for over 1,100 Kodak digital imaging patents. The technology Kodak invented, hoarded, suppressed, and been destroyed by was auctioned off to the companies that had built empires on its grave. Kodak emerged from bankruptcy on September 3, 2013, stripped of its consumer identity, reconstituted as a commercial printing and packaging operation. The Kodak moment was dead. What survived was a chemical company wearing a famous corpse's yellow suit. Fast forward to the modern era, and the mutations grow more surreal. In 2018, Kodak announced Kodak Coin, a cryptocurrency for digital image rights. The stock surged. The project evaporated within months. Then, in the summer of 2020, the United States government offered Kodak a $765 million loan under the Defense Production Act to manufacture pharmaceutical ingredients, generic drug precursors bearing no relation to cameras or film. The stock rocketed from $2 to over $60 in 48 hours. Insider trading allegations erupted. Congressional investigations followed. The loan was suspended indefinitely. A 130-year-old photography company courted by the government to produce drug compounds during a pandemic. The absurdity crystallized Kodak's tragicomic modern existence. But this was not a corporate whim. It was a declaration to the world. We refuse to die quietly. We will mutate into whatever this economy demands, no matter how unrecognizable. We are not a relic of the past. We are a survival organism, and you will reckon with us. And so we are left with two irreconcilable visions of Eastman Kodak. The first is a towering cautionary monument to the deadliest strain of corporate arrogance ever documented. The company that engineered the weapon of its own annihilation identified the threat with scientific precision. 3 decades before competitors understood it existed, and chose, quarter after quarter, year after year, to protect the dying prophet rather than embrace the living future. A corporation that held 7,000 patents for a technology it refused to deploy. That watched a 24-year-old engineer demonstrate the future in a basement and responded with 5 words that sealed the fate of 145,000 jobs. The second vision is quieter, more melancholic, almost unbearably romantic. The memory of a company that for 130 years served as the silent custodian of humanity's most intimate moments. Every wedding, every birthday, every graduation, every blurry photograph of a child running through a sprinkler on a July afternoon. Kodak chemistry transformed light into permanence, fleeting instants into objects you could hold, frame, and pass down through generations. No algorithm, no cloud server, no smartphone gallery has ever replicated the weight of a faded photograph pulled from a shoebox in a grandparent's attic. They forged the ultimate corporate mechanism of memory, and in doing so, made themselves so indispensable that they confused permanence of emotion with permanence of business model. Because sometimes, hidden behind the simple yellow logo of Kodak, there is a quiet, invisible war. A war between the revolutionaries they were in 1888, the monopolists they became by 1996, the corpse they were declared in 2012, and the strange, unrecognizable entity that still bears their name. Proof that in the cathedral of capitalism, the most dangerous invention a company can ever create is the one that makes its own product obsolete.